This week, a major incident at OR Tambo International Airport raised serious legal and humanitarian questions. A charter flight from Kenya landed with 153 Palestinian passengers. They were detained on the tarmac for at least 10 hours by border authorities because they arrived without exit stamps on their passports, no return tickets or proof of accommodation. Crucially, despite the clear grounds for denial of entry, none of them applied for asylum at the time of arrival. After humanitarian group Gift of the Givers intervened, 130 of them were ultimately granted a standard 90-day visa to enter South Africa. The group is also calling for an investigation into how the chartered flight carrying the group landed in South Africa. To unpack the complex immigration laws at the heart of the story and what it means for South Africa and border security, we are now joined by immigration lawyer Ashraf Essop. Mr. Essop, thank you so much for your time and for joining us this morning. So let's maybe start off with just general immigration rules. Under South Africa's immigration law, what would constitute irregular entry and what legal consequences could arrive from that Palestinian's arrival without proper travel documentation?
Okay, thank you and good morning. In terms of the Immigrations Act, only the BMA has the authority to man our ports of entry. Generally speaking, you have two categories of persons, those that are visa exempt and those that need to enter with a visa. Palestinians are visa exempt to enter into the Republic as bona fide visitors for a period of 90 days. Now, what had happened is, in terms of the Immigrations Act, when they landed here, they were informed that because they didn't have exit stamps, apparently that was a bar to entering. It's interesting when you look at some of the public comments by people who have more knowledge about how the system works when you leave Gaza or Israel. It's interesting to see that they say they are no longer physical stamps, that you issued some kind of paper or some other notification. But you know, in the age of digital passports, everything is captured in the chip. The second interesting thing is every airline that enters the Republic has to send an advance passenger manifest to the Department of Home Affairs way ahead. It says, look, these are the passengers. And Home Affairs is supposed to be vetting those passengers before they could even board the aircraft. So again, another unknown and another mystery. When you land here in the Republic, you ought to be invited into the main building, the main terminal building. It's unusual to do immigration work on the aircraft or inviting people to sit on the aircraft and not disembark. Again, that's a very dangerous thing to keep passengers on the tarmac for a very long time. There's always dangers of accidents and fires, etc. Be that as it may, if you present yourself to an immigration officer, he has a discretion. He can refuse you entry, or he can admit you in terms of the country's normal immigration rules. So in this case, despite the fact that apparently the passengers had not at that stage even known that they were landed in Johannesburg, let alone evincing an intention to either visit South Africa or acquire asylum transit visa. So again, because of the fact that the passengers themselves say they did not know where they were being sent, not traveling to. So it wasn't a choice. Apparently, there was in the background some kind of arrangement for them to go to Indonesia or Malaysia. You know, the background is very, very sketchy. And how could you then say to an immigration officer what your intention is if you don't know even where you are? Be that as it may, the immigration officer is obliged in terms of the Immigration Act Section 9, Regulation 6, to conduct an interview. And if he's not happy, he could say to the passenger, look, or any person at the counter, look, I don't think I'm happy with your explanation and I'm refusing you entry. Now, when that happens, the appeals process in terms of Section 8 kicks in. It's very interesting because Section 8 is divided into two sections, 8.1 and 2, and then 8.3 and 4 onwards. So 8.1 will apply at, let's call it the airport cases. And if 8.1 applies, then it has two subsections, A and B, subsection 8.1, A and B. And it interestingly reads with Section 2. The first one says that if you are refused entry, you must be given reasons in writing and an opportunity to make representations to the Minister of Home Affairs. In the event that you've made representations and the airline is about, it doesn't say airline, it says the conveyancer is about to leave, then you must get onto that conveyance and leave and await the outcome from outside the Republic. In the event that the conveyance has left, that's 8.2b, it says, then you cannot be removed from the Republic, and you file your representations in 3 days. You cannot be removed from the Republic until the minister makes a final decision. So these are the protocols that will operate at a port of entry. Now, in terms of the airline having sent the manifest, etc., there are other background, like you have to have landing rights, etc. You have to inform the tower where you're coming from, what your flight plan is, etc. So all of that should have been in place before the people arrived in the Republic.
Right.
And then we know from there onwards what happened. They were not allowed to disembark.
So, Ashraf, I mean, with all of these flags that you are flagging at the moment, I mean, with the advanced passengers manifest, which they had to have done with the landing with the airport. We also know that that first flight that landed on the 28th of October, it's alleged that those passengers also did not have an exit stamp from the country that they were coming from. What would you then deduce the situation to have been? Did South Africa really not know that these flights were coming into the country?
Well, I think South Africa knew the flights were coming into the country. And the first one might have been a test, because these people say, they give a very harrowing story of how, they had to leave and go to apparently a military air base to be flown out of Ramon. I'm not sure if that's correct. And then from Ramon onwards to Nairobi, and from Nairobi to SA. But it's really not really a mystery. I think there's a lot of cover-up going on, and I don't know who's doing the cover-up. But certainly the fact that there was a previous flight and they were admitted as visitors for 90 days, well, that was the trial and test run. So we would have been prepared. We would have known, as we know from visitors from all over the world, whether any country gives a physical exit stamp or there's a digital exit stamp. In South Africa, when you land here, they give you a physical entry stamp and exit stamp. As we know, the Border Management Agency has upgraded those to prevent fraud, etc. So we know exactly from the stamp when you arrived and who was authorized to let you into the country. So I think it begs the question, how can it be that the authorities should know that there's no physical exit stamp given by A, B, and C countries, and not demand that as a means of entry into the Republic?
Right.
So one of the things that you have to have is a valid passport. The second is, only if you're suspicious about the activity or the visitor coming in, would you ask for, say, example, proof of funds, a return ticket, let's see where you accommodated. So obviously, again, it being very unusual, it was also unusual for us that to observe the activities of how the authorities dealt with these people. I mean, where in the world will you find that women and children, especially minor children, are kept in the baking sun in an aircraft without air conditioning and kept on there for 12 hours. What about the sanitation needs of the babies, of the mothers? Now, you know, the South African Constitution applies to everyone within its borders, including foreigners.
Right.
And the High Court is the upper guardian of all minor children. And the minor children's rights should have been taken into account by the authorities at the airport. But it seemed just to be overlooked completely. I'm sure there's going to be lots and lots of answers coming out.
There certainly needs to be, but I think what I need to understand from you, Ashraf, sorry to interject there. I mean, you speak of how there was no plan of accommodation for any of these passengers on flight. None of them had return tickets. Would this constitute human trafficking?
That could be a definition, because human trafficking is very, very wide. You know, generally in human trafficking cases, you are made a promise of something and then you're sent off somewhere else. You know, it's modern day slavery, basically. It's the same thing that happened years and years ago when people were forcibly removed, put on ships and sent to a destination unknown. Now, at the end, again, we don't know what the purpose is for human trafficking. This only comes out later on when there's survivors. They tell you, look, we were sold in domestic labor or sweatshops or you know, illegal activity, etc. So in this case, I think it does fit that definition. You removed, and then it's not even a general commercial airline. My question is, who would have paid for a charter? A charter is not cheap. Even if these people paid 2,000 per person, apparently, you couldn't charter a flight to South Africa and then to leave empty. That flight was not going to go back with passengers. So again, lots and lots of questions. And it does appear to be human trafficking, although the end result is that you're not sold into labor. But in this case, it seems that you are forced to make another country your temporary or permanent place of stay.
So as things are, how then do we classify or define them? Are they refugees? Are they asylum seekers? Are they stateless?
So let's talk about the intention to apply for asylum. If you come into South Africa in terms of the Refugees Act, and you're at a port of entry, well, then you can say to the immigration officer, look, I now want to apply for asylum. And he has to, because the Act says must. He must issue you with an asylum transit visa, valid for a period of 5 days, to allow you to make your way to the nearest refugee reception office, which is in Marabastad in Victoria. If you don't apply for that at the port of entry and you enter the public, although you've entered legally, later on you're going to have to give what we call good cause explanation as to why you didn't do so at the airport. Now, neither of those scenarios played out, because as we know, the Minister of Home Affairs steps in and he's publicly on record as saying there's a humanitarian reason they were entered into, and there's an intelligence gathering exercise, or there's investigations by the intelligence. But none of those people, as far as I know, applied or were told to apply for asylum at the port of entry. So again, a lot of investigation needs to be done as to how this concession came about. I mean, right now they admitted in terms of the Immigrations Act, 90-day visitor's visa, which is the normal entry.
So Ashraf, I mean, if we look inward and we need to place accountability as to who would be held responsible for these people, I mean, we know that BMA was not allowing them in, as you mentioned, that they were left there on the tarmac for all those hours, and BMA was simply saying that even when they did ask if they wanted asylum, many of them had said no, and on that basis, they then could not allow them in. So who do we hold accountable in the situation? Is it the BMA? Is it the Home Affairs Department? Is it the President who allowed them in? Is it those civil society organizations that fought for them to come into the country, especially in the context of South Africa having to fight at porous borders, with many organizations within the country are fighting against other African countries that are seeking a refuge in South Africa. Where do we draw the line between the spirit of the law and the rule of law?
So it's interesting you mentioned porous borders, because ORT is not a porous border. Porous borders would be unmanned borders with our neighbors, and we know there's lots of smuggling, etc. there. If you ask me primary responsibility for this disaster, I would put it at the door of the BMA, because that's when everything unfolded. First of all, how do you keep people on an airline while you supposedly looking at their status? They could have been invited into the entrance hall, and they could have been sitting there or whatever. And I believe some of them had transit visas. So they were all now held together, and the ones with transit visas were not allowed to go anywhere. That's, again, very, very interesting. How did they have transit visas in advance? And who arranged this whole thing? I think the mystery is not on our side. It is beyond our borders. And those people that participated in this entire exercise also have to be interviewed and get their side of the story as well. So if you come back to South Africa, interestingly, the South African police services were involved in this, and they, in terms of the Refugees Act, were also very instrumental in trying to get a solution. And they boarded the airline to interview passengers, and they took members of civil society with them onto the airline. And that's when a lot of help was coming through, because now suddenly the doors were opened, air was allowed, a limited amount of water, and there was some kind of order brought by the South African police services. So they seem to have acted independently and in terms of the rule of law that you just pointed out correctly. Now, the rule of law starts with the Constitution. It's respect for the dignity of the people. And dignity is vouchsafed in the Bill of Rights. So if there's anything else that you avoided, you couldn't avoid the dignity of anyone in terms of the Constitution. And that is a very, very important lesson for everyone to learn, that every official, every person in the entire chain of governance has to give proper and due diligence to the right of dignity. Do you know why the right of dignity is important? It's because historically we were prevented. Our dignity was taken away. It was deliberately crafted into the Constitution to protect our dignity in the future. Dignity belongs to all humans by virtue of them being human beings. That is what a judge said in the Constitutional Court